Digital, to me, is the solution to turn from sick care into healthcare. And so I think that in the future, all of us, not just patients, but every citizen will have an avatar, a digital twin, which basically gets all the data which define who we are. If you look to the entire spectrum of what is happening in a pharma company or in a healthcare company, that a lot of the things happening there will be digitized. It's the doctor who uses this kind of conversational generative AI to get superpowers and to become a better doctor.
Koen, it's a pleasure and honor to have you here today. I look forward to talking about global best practices in the development and use of digital healthcare solutions. You're very welcome to share your personal knowledge and experience. To start with, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Okay, so my name is Koen Kas. I'm a Belgian healthcare futurist, which I have to disclaim already because I cannot predict the future. But we developed a methodology called delight thinking to help create the future from a white page. And there is one thing I'm obsessed about. I really believe that we can build the world from scratch in which we no longer need to get sick. And that is why I believe that digital is really going to transform the entire, well-being and lifestyle of us. And that's, I think, what we're going to discuss the next hour and a half.
That's great. Do you have an IT project? Andersen will do everything to launch it as soon as possible. Strengthen your resources with our specialists. Hire a well-coordinated, dedicated team, or entrust the entire development process to us. Getting started is easy. Fill out the contact form to get a free consultation.
Your major clinical area is molecular oncology. You have developed a new drug for brain cancer in children. You are the founder and CEO of a company committed to improving diagnosis and personalized treatment for patients with ovarian cancer, preeclampsia, cardiorenal syndrome, and sepsis. Why have you found interest in these particular areas?
I'm born with some curiosity. And as a child, I've always been impressed by how we can make a human being from two cells, right? An egg and a sperm. And that always has been fascinating me. And when I decided, what to do in school, I decided to become a biomedic because that gave me access to biology, trying to apply that in medicine. And I have had the honor with fantastic teams to work on the biology of a number of cancers to elucidate the real reason why people get cancer and really go to the foundation, the molecular kind of signature. And that gave me kind of the credibility to become a molecular oncologist, right? And that knowledge we used to start thinking about new ways to develop antibodies, drugs. But to be honest, the most confronting thing with these things was seeing children 6 years old with brain cancer. And that was one of the things which later on changed my life completely. The idea or the realization that we could hardly do anything well, that maybe impact would be much better if I could invest in detecting disease in time. And that's why we founded Pronota, where we developed a complete platform to use very low abundant proteins, biomarkers in blood, to identify disease much earlier than we could do before. And why I think this has been super valuable, I speak biology, is that has built the trust. Now that we work together with big tech companies, with big pharma companies, that they have someone in front of them who is saying, we are no longer going to get sick, and that they don't kick me out because they might fear that their business model, making money from people who are sick, is going to change big time, right? And nevertheless, I start to see that based on the trust built by being in biotech, by being in academia to discover what makes you sick, that is the reason why people are listening to the topics we're going to discuss today. And why I think that even a pharma company will become a healthcare company. I even believe that every company, incidentally, will become a healthcare company. And that's a fascinating thought to further develop today.
How and why did you switch to working with digital technologies?
My eye-opening moment came when I went to the west of China, somewhere early the 10s, and discovered a very old healthcare system, more than 2,000 years old, in which the doctor got paid as long as people in the village remained healthy. And once you got sick, you no longer had to pay. So I started to think, well, why did we lose that? Because that's the most fascinating model I've ever heard about, right? And the reason why we lose that, or lost that, is because if I send a package from here in Antwerp to Barcelona, I can trace my package every 5 seconds, and I know where the package is. While my patient, my diabetic patient, my cancer patient, my whatever patient, is 8,700 hours a year by himself or herself, not linked to me as a healthcare provider. And so digital technology has the promise to enter into the real world of our patient, to cover these 8,750 hours, and to become the digital version of that Chinese doctor. And so I think that in the future, all of us, not just patients, but every citizen will have an avatar, a digital twin, which basically gets all the data which define who we are and will become our second-hand doctor like Baymax in Big Hero 6. So digital, to me, is the solution to turn from sick care into healthcare.
The main focus of Connect University's report devoted to the future of healthcare was on the future of oncology and the benefits of technology for personalization, diagnosis, and prognosis. I guess my question is, how digital technology is transforming oncology today? Can you give examples of successful solutions that already exist?
A number of fascinating things. If we look to genetics, 12-15% of cancers are genetic and hereditary. I get them from my parents, right? And so digital has helped to start being able to elucidate genomes, no longer for $3 billion in something like 10 years' time, but we can now do that in 3 hours, a full genome analysis for just a few $100s, right? Now, it's not about the tech and the speed, it's about what do you do with that. So if I tell my students, 22 years old, well, who wants his or her genome sequenced? The majority says, well, not me, because imagine, I find out I'm predisposed to get breast cancer, like Angelina was, and she removed her 2 breasts. That's not something I can handle. And then I show them a bra, which is in clinical development, which contains at the inside of the cup a small sensor, which sticks to my, well, Angelina's breast, and captures the heat only when a tumor starts growing. And then, if I show that to my students, all of a sudden 1 in 5 turns in 4 in 5, because maybe the tumor is not growing, and I still have my 2 breasts, right? And if it happens, maybe I'm 55, it's easier to make this kind of decision. So digital technology allows me to change behavior towards willing to know. Second example, if I tell men I can look to the chance that you get colon cancer, majority of men say, well, nice, but not nice, because the next step, you're going to put a tube in the back of my body. We no longer do that. We now have small, tiny camera capsules. We swallow, they swim through our GI, they make better pictures than we've ever seen before, and all of a sudden, 1 in 5 turns into 3 in 5 men willing to say, well, this is something I want to be acquainted to, and this helps me to get screened in time. So that's one aspect. We're going to use technology to convince people in a frictionless fashion to get sequenced and to deal with that. Second one, and fascinating as well, if we look to our immune system, which we only since 10 years start to understand why it basically loses from the cancer and is not kind of defeating the cancer, we are starting to be able to measure a number of molecules from our immune system, basically when they are offline, when they're off baseline. So a number of biomarkers, which I could measure with patches, with devices in my body, will be telltale for mutations which are going to appear somewhere else in 2 or 3 years and become visible. So I will be able to detect tumors earlier. And just like we have the NIP test for pregnant women to look to trisomies, trisomy 21, we now start to have the first liquid biopsy tests which look in my blood to very rare spores of tumors which I don't see, which I don't feel, but which are there, which grow, and which are in time to be removed. And then lastly, as an example, the fact that in the past we needed big scanners, MRI scans and CT scans to get people scans. That all comes into handheld devices. The first CT scanners are there, which I can hold in my hand and to look in my body when something is off track. I start to see the first companies which offer me a full body screening, where technology allows me to be in time. And I think these things, when they become commoditized, will really dramatically change how and how fast we will discover cancers. And the faster we're able to do it, the better we'll be able to treat.
Thanks for the great examples, Koen. It's really fascinating. My next question is, and that's kind of interesting, what digital solutions will never work in oncology in your opinion, and why?
I think you shouldn't underestimate that one of the biggest questions patients have is, what is going to happen with me if I hear the word big C? And unfortunately, when a doctor says, well, Mr. Kas, you have cancer, after 6 seconds, the patient blanks out. All the things the doctor keeps on telling him or her, he forgets, and basically he's lost because he has no clue what is going to happen. So not knowing is the biggest challenge we have to solve. And that's the first thing where digital is going to help. I think that we're going to move to a world where all the information I need as a patient from my doctor, how will treatment look like? How will I lose my hair? Why is there reason to believe that I will survive? How will I tell my family? These things I want to have access to when I'm ready to digest. And I think we're going to have things like immersive worlds. Some people might call it the metaverse. We sometimes do that as well. We're going to have virtual worlds where I can go to and where I can start to ask questions. Maybe not to my real doctor, but to my virtual doctor. Where basically my virtual doctor can tell me, well, Koen, put on your AR or VR glass and I'll tell you what's happening in your body. I show you how the tumor grows. I show you how medication will work. I show you how I will cut it out. And basically, he starts to build the trust that I'm in good hands and that I will be able to deal with it. That mentally, I will be able to deal with things as well. And that new doctor will prescribe me apps like Better Life or Cancer Life. And Cancer Life are apps which allow me as a cancer patient to start logging things in my real world. And they help me to improve quality of life today on average with 15%, 1-5. You might argue, well, 1-5% is not a lot. But 1-5% is 1 day in a week that my quality of life is better and that I feel less stigmatized and have the energy to deal with my surroundings. That is what digital will do. It's not just medication, it will take the frictions around being a patient away and will make sure that I have the strength and the power to deal with my tumor because all the surroundings get better. And with surroundings, things like mental health, top priority. I mean, once I get cancer, I have a mental issue. I have fear, I have anxieties, I have things where will I ever manage to go back to work? If your doctor can manage to get them out of the way, then you become a really good doctor.
I've prepared a question about Metaverse, which we shall revisit. And tell me now, how accurately can AI make a prognosis for cancer progression today?
I think I often love we are in the Stone Ages, we are moving to the Copper Ages. If I look to what we could do something like 2 years ago, and I look to what we can do now, we get bigger data sets. We do no longer need big data sets. I mean, prognosis goes up to the 95-99% range. That is better than what a human being can do. I mean, for a number of cancers, I would love that the analysis of the slides of the biopsies, which are currently being analyzed by a real human pathologist, I would prefer that the machine does it. Because the machine starts to be able to see trends, to see patterns, which a human being really is not able to do. We have recently data on that in glioma. So I think that prognosis, if we talk, it's half 2023 now, by 6 months from now, by a year from now, will really start to become a standard practice in a clinical armatorium. So the power of prognosis is good enough to bring it into clinical practice today. Absolutely.
95% accuracy is impressive. Have you ever faced the peculiarity of modern healthcare that diagnostic methods and techniques are advancing more rapidly than treatment methods?
The thing is, we already are saying a long time that the power of the diagnostic should become even to the power of the therapeutic. We're not there yet. At the power of the therapeutic, the value is still perceived much higher. Incidentally, pretty recently, I had a discussion with one of the big pharma companies, which were not yet there in endorsing digital technology. And at some point in time, one of the oncology guys made the point, well, our next drug will probably make $3 billion. We don't have to worry yet about digital technology, which come into that place. But bear in mind that if all of a sudden something which not coming from pharma uses a diagnostic tool to identify that something is happening and you prevent me from getting the cancer and I no longer need the 3 billion drug, the pharma company has a problem, right? It's exactly where we have been with Kodak and BlackBerry and Nokia. The company saying, well, digital, we're not going to do that. And a few years later, something else happened. So I think the majority of pharma I work with are really seeing that instead of waiting till you get very sick and the cure comes there, that investing in early diagnosis is their future. And so we are helping a number of them to use digital technology to identify the patient earlier, not just cancer, but also Parkinson's patients, MS patients, patients with chronic inflammatory diseases, and to be able to maximize the chance that medication still functions. And if I may, to give an example, it's not in oncology, but it's a really extreme interesting one. I guess you've been exploring, I've been testing, or you have get on one at home, a Google Home, Apple device, or Sony, or Amazon device to talk to. It's searched by voice. And basically, we have a big project with the Parkinson Foundation in which we've proven that you can tell from how I pronounce my vowels 2 years in advance that I will develop Parkinson's disease. So instead of waiting till I get a tremor, I can just listen to how you search and can identify you and basically can treat you with drugs which will not work if the disease progresses too far. And that's a fantastic example on the power of digital technology to be in time, in early diagnosis, and expanding the number of patients you can treat. It's an important thing because sometimes people think, well, every patient which is not getting sick is a patient lost. But what I do, I give you 10 patients in return, which are a little bit less sick. And your market gets 10 times larger, but you treat differently. And if people understand that, then all of a sudden they start to see that maybe the next thing is early diagnosis, and very early, and even prevention. And at some point in time, we're going to see that that entire model becomes a business model of preference.
You chair the scientific committee of the European Cancer Prevention Organization, which is an incredibly important job. So tell us, what cancer prevention methods really work?
I think it's always the same. I mean, telling people eat healthy, sleep well, all these things we know. And therefore the challenge is not so much repeating what we know, but trying to sell that in a delightful fashion. And so we found out that sometimes the explanation people need is changing something in their lifestyle so that they look forward to do something. Let me explain. You might have been playing Pokemon once, trying to find augmented reality features which didn't exist somewhere on the planet. When people started doing it, we started to see an increase of physical activity for 30% for a number of months. People all of a sudden, by playing a game, went out and started moving, right? The guys from Pokemon just launched Peridot. And Peridot is a kind of Tamagotchi. You get a private, unique egg. It deshells and you get a Peridot, a small virtual pet which you have to keep alive. Well, we start to see the first people keeping a pet alive and for that reason going out to walk. And that's a fascinating way to provide people with delightful solutions to embark on a healthier lifestyle, which is still the best kind of advice we can give to people. And if you then look to things like smoking, we know 15%, pretty significant chance to get lung cancer. But if we start to see that big corporates, for instance, say, well, if you stop smoking when you basically are part of my company and I provide you with 6 days extra of vacation, well, I can tell you, people start to listen. That's not a digital solution. That's a kind of, well, quality of life solution. But then we start to see digital therapeutics, which an employer can offer to his employee and tell his employee, look, it's your decision, but I'm happy to help you to stop smoking. And we start to see that employers are basically liking these new digital solutions because that gives them a way to distinguish them from other kind of likewise employees, because health of their employees is getting top of mind, especially since Corona. And so the spectrum of tools we can bring to our, citizens expands because employers start to get involved in bringing preventive care to our future patients. And this way, I think that's also dealing with healthy lifestyle, with mental health, are all the things, if we bring them in a delightful fashion, will bring the amount of new cancers tremendously down. On the other hand, the numbers will still go up because it's a disease of aging. And because we keep on living longer, we will still see an increase of number of cancer cases. But we will die with cancer. We will not die from cancer. That will be the difference. I've mentioned earlier, I'm a big proponent of genetic screening. If I give keynotes about the topic, each time people now come to us and say, well, where can I be helped? Where can I start to do these things? And if the national or the federal kind of healthcare provider is running behind, I think it's the customer, the patient, who will start to request that even beyond the classical healthcare model, there might become access to care which is, not yet provided by the national care provider, but where the citizen is ready to adopt and be helped because he sees the possibility of a life without getting diseased, if you're happy and open to deal with these data points. And that's something to come back to later on as well.
You are the founder and CEO of Healthskouts, a digital health consulting company that maintains and supervises one of the world's leading databases of certified healthcare solutions. What are those creative digital healthcare projects of the current year that surprised and inspired you most of all? And I'm sure there are not only positive examples of digital healthcare initiatives, but also negative ones that you can share with us.
One of the fascinating ones I got involved with is here in Belgium, where in Belgium we, as part of Europe, we said, is there a new way to look to dealing with health data? And there is the classical model, my data go to Google, to Facebook, and they monetize me. There is a Chinese model where data go to the States and they define what I should do. And there is the European dream to provide the citizen his dashboard and his basically access to and all these things. But that never happens. Till the inventor of the internet, one of the co-inventors of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, started to think about a new protocol called Solid to build on top of the classical internet and to use new protocols to decentralize data by providing every user a personal online data store, a pod. This is something your listeners should remember, pods. And so my country was the first one to kind of adopt that idea. And we are currently working on the launch of the very first citizen-centric data platform, where we're gonna provide the Belgian citizen with an online data store, where he or she can define which data to upload. But he defines also who can look to this data, so they don't go anywhere. So let me give you an example. Imagine I'm allergic to gluten. What I now have to do, I have to go to my retailer, put on my glasses, watch to the fine print of every product to exclude that there's gluten in it, and that's what we are used to. In the future, I will tell my personal online data store I'm gluten intolerant. I give access to my retailer to read that data point in my pot, and from now on, there is 29 products I can no longer buy at my retailer. I have shared one data point, and in a frictionless manner, I have avoided that I'll eat gluten and get an allergic reaction, right? That is what we are building. Let me give you a second example. I'm bound to get blind. I mean, based on my genetic profile, I have a genetic predisposition for an eye disease. And people say, well, you should not tell that to people. I tell that to everybody. Even to my insurer, I would also tell that to my POTS. So that a pharma company who is developing new medication to eventually treat the disease can knock my POTS, get access to that data point, access to me eventually in a trial, and basically use me to maximize the chance that we find a solution. And so these POTS, we hope, will provide us with tools to collect the real-world data, which are not collected in our medical records, but which are 99.5% of who we are, and that these POTS will be the starting point to create digital twins of every citizen in Belgium. And that's one of the most exciting projects I'm working on, involved with, and hope that we manage to get that up and running.
Are there any common mistakes in the digitalization of healthcare you're familiar with? And is there any advice you can share with the companies who are working hard to make healthcare more digital regarding what they should possibly avoid doing?
I think it always starts, there's a number of things. You have the design thinking world. Design thinking says, well, find me a problem and we find you the solution. Talk to the end user, talk to the consumer and find out. On one hand, I see a lot of digital health which starts with tech guys, which didn't speak to the end user, the patient, in the first year and a half. I mean, that should no longer happen. I mean, the entire idea that you sell to a clinic and sell to a doctor, sure, but that at the end it's the patient who gets the thing to use, make sure that the patient is part of the product development from day -1, obviously. But second, very often in digital, people think, well, we need to get something so solid, it needs to be regulated. It needs to be certified to get reimbursed. I think that's an advice I'm no longer giving. Because if you invest in regulation, it's time, money-wise, a constraint. And if you haven't proven that your patient is willing to use the solution, it stops. He will not start using it because it's certified, right? So very often we advise to people, even while we, our team Healthskouts, we curate the database of every certified health app on the planet, even then we sometimes advise go in the field, go live. Try to find out whether your patient is willing to use the app, is willing to apply the app, see the benefits, and with these data, you then can go to certification. So that's advice number 2. Do not just look into certification in medical, right? Try to look to the 2 parts. And then 3, design thinking is one. I have a challenge, I make a solution. But what I like big time is delight thinking. And delight thinking is based on unknown unknowns. Sometimes there is things I don't realize I can get. If there is this kind of famous thing, I don't know if it's true, when Ford said, if I would have asked my customers what they would have liked to have, they would have said a faster horse. It was a car. So sometimes you cannot ask your patient or your doctor or your clinic what he or she is willing. But imagine you turn it around and you're the first who helps build the trust for a clinic to tell the patient, you no longer have to come to me. I come to you. I use remote monitoring. I use technology which is trusted by the clinic to keep you at home. That is something where the patient is willing to listen to. That is something where, in my opinion and experience, the clinic is willing to listen to. And so companies which really understands how the relation between the clients and the end user can reduce frictions in the both of these lives, these are the winners. And so for that reason, I'm both a proponent of making novel solutions for things which exist and starting to think about deleting frictions out of healthcare and developing things even while they haven't been asked for from the beginning. And there's one last thing. There is a big tendency to believe that people are not willing or afraid to share health data. I think that's absolute nonsense. I think what we need to be good at is showing how sharing one data point in return for a service is really opening up my willingness to share data. And I very often compare that to what Disney does with the magic bands. If you enter the park in Disneyland, you get magic bands. Your name, the name of your partner, the name of your kids. You start wearing the bands, enter the park, you don't have to pay. That's the product, wireless payment. But what the band allows you to do, if you give up your location, it tells you when to move to an attraction to avoid being in a line. And I find that fantastic because it provides you a service where it needs the point in time where you are somewhere on the planet, right? But the fascinating thing was when I once, first time applied it, my wife got flowers at Disney. Was it a problem if she would not have received flowers? No. But I had filled in her birthday and we came near the weekend of her birthday. She didn't provide access to that data point, but the fact that they used that data point to give flowers, I will never forget. That is delight. And I think if we look to healthcare as well in such way, showing to patients that sharing a data point gives us the power to anticipate things, that will give us real superpowers. And we might come back to AI, to artificial intelligence. I like to call that anticipational intelligence. If I have 24/7 all the data who define you, I can anticipate and I can get the biggest friction out of sick care, which is getting sick in the first place. And so these are things I try to tell to digital health entrepreneurs from day one as well. Use data to create healthcare delights. And then maybe one last thing, don't look to healthcare in a one-directional way. Try to think about third parties who are all willing to enter healthcare and where you might see probabilities to get funding from because it allows them to enter into a world where they hope to get being a part of.
Thanks, Koen. That's valuable. You've mentioned regulation, which is a big deal in healthcare. There is legislation in Germany, Digital Healthcare Act, which defines the requirements for digital solutions used for medical purposes, DIGA, as they call it. Similar legislation also exists in some other countries. How do such acts contribute to the development of the digital healthcare market?
Really important questions. I think we've been expecting too much of these things. I mean, Germany with DIGA has been the country everybody was looking to see, well, how they would manage once digital health apps became reimbursed. It was very disappointing to see that after 1 year, only 2% of doctors were subscribing them. One, lack of awareness, but second, also the requirement that they had to document the outcome of the use of the app that required more of their time, and that more of the time was a reason for them often not to subscribe even these apps. So some advantage was counterbalanced by the disadvantage for the doctor, one. Two, if I look to a country like Belgium, we have 38 apps waiting to get reimbursed. There is only one of these apps, well, ready of being reimbursed. So for some reason, there is a lack between, well, what the healthcare development, this entrepreneurial world can develop and what the system is ready to adopt. So there is a disbalance, which implies, and that's the real answer to your question, that a number of what we took for granted things are changing. My country, Belgium, we always have said healthcare should be reimbursable and 95% comes from the government. But now we start to see that digital health apps enter the market. They're good apps, but they are not being reimbursed. And still, because real-world data underscore that the app is fine, we start to see that people are buying apps out of pocket. And all of a sudden, entrepreneurs see that the biggest value is not the reimbursement or the certification, it's the data which show that the app provides evidence to treat. And that's something which has been lacking in the past. Because if you look to the Apple Store and the Google Store, they both contain something like 130,000 apps which claim something to do with health, wellness, fitness. But if we look to the ones which are rigorously, which have real-world data evidence, which are certified, that list of apps is even not 300. And it's exactly that database my team, Healthskouts, is curating, which we put open on our site for people to look at. And that's always, if I talk somewhere, an eye-opener. Because people say, well, wow, half of them we didn't know they existed. Half of them are for patients, half are for doctors. And each time there is something where a doctor or patient says, well, wow, that's something I'm going to use. And that brings digital adoption forward. So the fact that there is a set of trusted apps, certified apps, helps to adopt. But the point is that the real help for adoption is showing that something has a benefit. And if we get these things balanced well, I think that we will see a change in how regulators will deal in speed with accepting and making things ready for reimbursement as well.
Now let's shift our focus to the subject of healthcare funding and investments. The development of a medtech product is not only time-consuming, but also expensive. What are the ways for companies to cut these costs and make digital health development more accessible?
A fascinating example which I've seen recently is a company called Clue. And Clue has developed an algorithm which uses the movement of my wrist, which is measured by looking to my Apple Watch or watch, to find out whether I'm drinking coffee or a soda or a beer or a tea. So based on the movement of my wrists, they basically can tell what I'm drinking. So that implies that they have a clue, that's where the name comes from, to enter into my real world and find out how I eat or drink. So instead of developing that algorithm and getting that into an app and applying that basically as a standalone, they made a deal with Medtronic. Medtronic, one of the biggest medtech companies, which have a franchise in diabetes, which currently sell medical devices for diabetic patients, but realizes that digital health will allow us to start changing lifestyle. And so Medtronic acquired Clue after less than 2 years in development. And so they started to become part of a bigger diabetic franchise, and that's the way how they can start growing. So taking and looking to ways to become part of bigger companies, one. Ways to see how you can become the beyond the pill solution, which goes hand in hand with the compounds. I think these are things they should be very early on the radar. And very often we still see tech people developing kind of fantastic solutions potentially, but without the knowledge of how pharma really works. And that is a big gap. And that sounds kind of a minimal thing, a small thing, but I feel a little bit that people who came out of a medical or bio backgrounds, they adapt digital pretty fast. But in order to learn bio and pharma from a digital perspective, that takes longer. And for that reason, I'm a very big proponent of initiatives like FarmStars, where basically digital health entrepreneurs are invited for 6 weeks or 8 weeks by pharma companies to get a crash course in drug development, in patient journeys, in what it takes to get something in a patient, so that they can learn and really understand where the difference can come from in providing value for the patient. And if I may give an example on that, Q 1.6, fantastic example. Recall how you opened your smartphone in the past. You had to type 4 numbers, and then you swiped, and then afterwards there was face recognition, and now you have basically a biometric with putting your finger on the smartphone and it opens. Well, on average, people are willing to wait 1.6 seconds between willing to open the phone and seeing the first opening screen, right? So in 1.6 seconds, I can ask you a question. How are you? How do you feel? Is it getting better? Now, people don't have to react on these questions, but we found out that using emoticons, you can get a very quick answer to a question in writing by just selecting out of 5 emoticons, a happy one or an unhappy one. So you start to see where I'm heading. By knowing that the average person opens his smartphone more than 70 times a day, you could ask every time a question. And maybe 60 times I do not answer, but sometimes I say happy, not happy, good, better, more pain, less pain. And all of a sudden, I have a way to collect real-world data with a digital tool running on the first screen of my smartphone. That company built a collaboration with a big pharma company and is currently being applied in a number of clinical trials to collect in the trial at home how people respond to drugs. And that company builds a relationship from almost day one with the pharma company, gets part of the funding, not via VC, but via a future end user, and this ways it's found a way to grow. And that are examples of ways where I don't have to raise venture capital from day one, but where I start to play with my future end user or customer from almost day one.
In 2021, total investments in digital health products in the US amounted to $29.3 billion, decreasing to $15.3 billion in 2022, and the first quarter of 2023 down to $3.4 billion across 132 deals, with a heavy representation of mega deals. Given this recent downward trend in funding, what digital healthcare areas look most promising for investment, in your opinion?
I think that we start to see that remote monitoring is gonna stay. So everything which allows me to collect data which can be entered into the medical records of a doctor should get attention. Why am I saying it this way? Because till 2 years ago, we saw that medical people said, well, I don't trust data recorded by devices at home by my patient customer if I cannot get them into my medical records. And then came Wittings. Wittings sells scales, amongst other things. And they built a collaboration with an interoperability digital health company called Redox. And Redox made a simple API to allow me to get my weight, my scale data into my medical records. And all of a sudden the world changed because that data points I could use as a doctor to deal with, right? And so if you would ask me what was one of the biggest digital health events in 2022, that was the announcement from Google, which acquired Fitbit before that the Fitbit API can be entered or can be used to read Fitbit data into my medical records. And so this way, I think we start to see that if your product is able to enter into the medical records and make it richer, that these are the ones which should get absolute priority towards funding. They are trusted, they're used by the hospital, and they're used by pharma companies. Because during Corona, people couldn't go to the hospital. Pharma had a hard time to reach people which were supposedly to be in the hospital in clinical trials. And so pharma came to ask, what can we trust to keep our patients at home? And so for that reason, digital technology, which allows me to read and to get data from my patients into my records, in my opinion, should remain a super high one on the agenda. One. Second, and it's maybe not digital health per se, but I really think that if you look to the entire spectrum of what is happening in a pharma company or in a healthcare company, that a lot of the things happening there will be digitized. And so the entire entry of the movement of generative AI entering our world has seen a big and profound change of thinking. And let me give you one example. I guess you've been playing with these tools like DALL-E, make me a share which looks like an avocado, and you type and you get the picture of an avocado share, whatever. And so if you start to be a little bit better in asking the right prompts, you can ask, here's a painting, ask me what would be being painted if the painting would be extending for 2 meters. And the computer shows you part of a painting which never has been made, but could make sense. So when we started to realize that these things came to the market, we started to ask questions like, could we envision how a next generation coronavirus could look like? Can the computer model, based on 3 dimensions, viruses we've never seen in real life, but which are basically designed by the computer? And so a fascinating development from the last few months is that a company like Airbus, they make planes, right, like Boeing, that they now have a team of 50 data scientists and AI people in-house, and they're developing, using, amongst other things, generative AI, antibodies. I mean, things which could discover and detect the viruses we've never seen, to use them in diagnostic devices, medical devices, to put in their cabin for flights which maybe in 10 years fly from Wuhan into Europe to detect viruses we've never seen before, but which have been designed by computers and which have been used to develop new generation antibodies to detect these and basically become predictive medical devices. And that I find a super fascinating development, where I think a lot of money will go into as well, is the use of predictive AI to design things we couldn't envision as human beings, but which are basically force-fitting nature.
Decentralized autonomous organizations like VitaDAO are both an emergent trend and the next step of applying blockchain technology to increase the efficiency and transparency of healthcare systems. Some of them are dedicated to cancer, genetic, and longevity research. If we look at a decentralized autonomous organization as a form of private equity financing, can it compensate for the recent decline in venture funding in digital health?
It's early to tell. I think it's an option. It's early. I think pharma and digital health are very conservative domains. And I haven't seen enough evidence that the adoption of these things is speedy enough that people are willing to take the risk to rethink that kind of business model to give you super good examples. It is happening. I'm aware of a number of examples, but they're not big enough to say, well, this is what the future really will look like. So I don't know that. On the other hand, the fact that the citizen starts to be able to take a lot of the kind of things a classical healthcare system provides in his or her own hands starts to imply that you might start to see a kind of a parallel healthcare world where these kind of autonomous models start to make sense. And again, early to tell, but I think the next 2 years will show us whether healthcare gets ready for that kind of change as well. Things like dealing with virtual assets, with virtual money. We see people experiment using blockchains in clinical trials. Only one real good example last year, I think. But again, super early, really super early.
AI-driven technologies have become a very active topic of discussion recently, with the potential to revolutionize healthcare by providing more accurate diagnosis, more advanced treatments, and improved patient engagement. How does the progress of conversational AI, particularly ChatGPT, affect the development of healthcare chatbots and symptom checkers?
It's funny you're asking. I think during Corona, I did some tests with my father. I gave him such Amazon Siri device to tell him, Daddy, it's time to take your medication, which he found cool but didn't like too much because he didn't like the Siri voice. So he used one of these tools. It was called Lyrebird at the time. It's now called Decrypt, which allows me to talk to my computer for 2 minutes. And after 2 minutes, I could type whatever text, which then gets pronounced with my voice. And we cloned that on the loudspeaker. And at 5 o'clock, my father heard me say, Daddy, it's time to take your medication. That he liked big time. That was my first application of kind of voice cloning generative AI. That was 2.5 years ago. What I now can do is basically clone myself, basically as an avatar, and basically let me talk with my voice to my father, so that even if I'm not there, he can ask, well, was it a big spoon or a small spoon I could take? And so in the last 6 months is the entire development of AutoGTP and the DALLs of these worlds. We start to see that this very quickly allows not just to do the anamnesis before I see a doctor, me myself, I ask, well, not really ChatGPT, but I ask ChatGPT, I like things, well, what is it that I have? And basically, we see that the doctor is willing to adopt these because he has a wider set of diagnostic kind of profiles. He can spend more time to really talk to me in an empathic fashion because all the thinking has been done by him, well, by the machine. And so what I very often ask to a doctor, if you have 10 minutes from me, and now you spend 5 minutes in typing in a machine without FaceTime, but seeing to the screen, and your colleague doctor has a device which listens to our conversation, records and gets that in the medical records, and then transcribes and makes a summary, so that you as a doctor have 10 minutes of FaceTime, which doctor will the future patient select and want? That's not a difficult one. It's the second one, right? It's the doctor who uses this kind of conversational generative AI to get superpowers and to become a better doctor. And I think, and I'm really kind of hopeful, that because of the low kind of hurdle of ChatGPT and DALL-E, that people started to use them in their daily life just to play with, is making the jump to apply that in their practice, in their healthcare practice, lower than ever before for any other technology. And that's why I now already see the first doctors adapting ChatGPT in their practice. Basically, 6 months, 7 months in the existence of the tool, and that's never seen before.
What major issues related to the use of conversational AI in medicine do you see?
The thing is, it seems that it seems to have reasoning, but it's not interpreting. It makes biases. It provides misinformation. What ChatGPT is able to do is get one part of a reference, combine it with another part of a reference, and generate a lookalike real reference which never has been written. So it misinforms us. It makes errors. It hallucinates. And these are things you cannot avoid to have in a healthcare kind of fashion. And so for that reason, we really have to make sure, realizing still that we are in the Stone Ages, right? And maybe in next month, we are in the Copper Ages, but that we have to realize that for some things it cannot be used yet, but for some things it basically expands our knowledge to report things properly. Let me give you an example. One of the things we recently did is asking ChatGPT, imagine I have to explain to a 6-year-old child that he has a leukemia. Can you come up with a number of ideas? And very nicely, he gave 3 ideas. 2 of them had to do with do it in a game, make some adventure out of the information, and think to use gamification to explain things. And so we said, well, cool, but that game, how should that look like? And so we simply asked the technology, can you basically write code to make a game in which I, as a doctor, explain why a child will be treated, how it gets adherent to the treatments, and how that game makes the difference between response and non-response, because it convinces the kid to keep on taking and coming back to the hospital for 6 months. What I'm explaining now, we did in something like half an hour. We went from an idea to something we could put in practice. I mean, that is mind-blowing. And their hallucination, bias, misinformation has nothing to do with it. This generates something where in the past I needed 5 people to do that, right? And so that helps me as a doctor, me as a healthcare professional, to be way more creative. And so for that reason, I really think that we're going to see from a white page applications we couldn't even dream of entering our healthcare system pretty soon. And that's, by the way, and maybe we'll come back to that on the metaverse, that I'm still a believer, even while the word is toxic, that metaverse will be a game changer in healthcare as well. That's maybe something you want to get back to later on in the discussion.
The American Hospital Association estimates that the U.S. healthcare industry will face a shortage of up to 124,000 physicians by 2033, and at least 200,000 physicians a year need to be hired to meet the rising care demands. Are you familiar with examples of utilizing AI to resolve the issue of healthcare workforce shortages?
Absolutely. In the past, for mental health, I always advised a very nice app which you can still download. It's called Woebot, W-O-E-B-O-T. And Woebot is a small kind of cartoon on my smartphone and which gets me to anxiety, to stress in an interactive fashion. What we now can do, for people who don't like the cartoon, we can make a digital human. For instance, we have a collaboration with Soul Machines. Soul Machines is the company in New Zealand which was involved in making Avatar and Kong and Lord of the Rings. So they make digital humans. So for instance, we can ask a patient, who was your best friend ever? Who was the person who taught you the most when you were a little child? And for me, for instance, that was my grandfather. And so now I can take black and white pictures of my grandfather, and via a number of iterative steps, I can make a three-dimensional digital human of my grandfather, who becomes my coach. And because he learned me so much as a child, I'm still willing to listen to him if he advises me. That's one example. So the fact that we can provide coaches using generative AI to teach me things. That's one example. A second example is something where the fact that a number of things I don't like to talk about. I mean, I dare to tell that I'm diabetic. I dare to tell that I have low back pain. But sometimes mental issues are things people don't like and even dare to talk about. And there we see that dealing with an avatar helps people to get over the hurdle to talk about this, and that this avatar at some point in time might convince me to see a doctor, or is good enough to bypass the months before I see a real doctor to get me through it and to help me. And so these are examples, if that was the question, if I remember it correctly, that's examples where we start to see real life applications happening now, as we speak now.
Are you familiar with examples of utilizing AI to resolve the issue of healthcare workforce shortages?
Yeah, one thing, and that's something where there is some ethical questions. I'm blank on the name now, but I've already seen one website where you can order a mental coach, but none of them are real. So you order male, female, or whatever, gender neutral, someone, age X, this kind of language, this specialty, and basically you order a mental coach. And the interaction you have is with, well, the same kind of chat GPT-like interaction, but with a visual, a human-like being, which is not existing and becomes your coach. And we've seen already a number of mental health companies providing feedback to the patients based on algorithm design, which people didn't like when they found out, right? But these are the ways where I think we're going to see tackling workforce shortage very quickly.
It's no secret that the development of AI technologies requires the creation of a regulatory environment comfortable for secure development and implementation. How, in your opinion, should the AI regulation system in healthcare be orchestrated?
I think every country starts to realize that something is needed. What we are doing in this country is really bringing a number of experts together, which are not just tech experts, but also ethicists, moralists, philosophists, basically to see how the speed of what is possible should be converted into what becomes possible. And I think that is important because in the past we've very often seen that technology moves and then all of a sudden there comes basically fight back. But I think if we learn that instead of fighting when it's too late, we work together and walk the path together, that is the way to make sure that adoption happens in a way that the community, that citizens are ready and able and willing to do so. And that's how we do it here. I think that's how it should be done. And again, creating awareness, it's so important. I mean, we hardly understand these AI algorithms, and a number of these are still black boxes. OpenAI also struggles by even understanding things. So if they struggle, how should I struggle? How should my customer struggle? And so therefore, I think we're going to see new jobs. We're going to see people which have as a single job to bring digital technology in a community, to explain what digital can do, to make sure that the roughly 18% of people we can currently not reach with digital, that's the number in our country, that gap gets smaller, and that we make sure that the fact that digital makes things so easy that is what unites us rather than that is what kind of gets us out of each other and makes us living in two speeds.
There are laws such as HIPAA in the US, GDPR in the EU, PIPEDA in Canada, which regulate how organizations collect, use, and disclose personal information. Is there anything that can be improved in this area?
I think, a super important question. I think cybersecurity becomes one of the key topics for the next years. I mean, everything what can be hacked will be hacked. Let that be clear. I've seen, you might have seen something, I think it was in Israel, a lung doctor, oncologist, which got the outcome of a scan and told the patient he had lung cancer. But the lung cancer was basically an artifact hacked onto the slide coming from the CT. So if we can do that, if that happened once, it will happen again. So the security of making sure that the data I use to decide can be trusted, absolute top priority. And so again, I mentioned ethicists and moralists in the past. I think cybersecurity experts, which go hand in hand with the implementation of these new technologies, that is basically how the big picture should look like. And GDPR in Europe has proven to have a number of advantages. It makes things sometimes, well, more cumbersome, but basically it allows us to create an asset. It shouldn't see it as a burden. You can use it as an asset, and it has helped to build the trust and to move things forward as well. So it's not always an issue. On the other hand, sometimes I'm laughing that privacy is for sissies, and that the entire idea of the entire world would be better with something called radical transparency. And we're not there yet, but imagine that I would be able to share every single data point. How much easier would that be? And you might say, well, that's naive. Well, I don't think that's so naive, because what we start to see in a number of companies we collaborate with, that they have creativity labs or innovation labs. And even in a number of pharma companies, I see non-compliant labs. So it's, while they need to be super compliant, they have to get through 50,000 of regulations. But in order to make the mindset of their people open, they say, well, let's do the invention like there would be no requirements, there would be no legislation, just to avoid that the first thing people are saying, we're not going to do that. You have to open up, and then we're going to build walls, rather than building walls and making sure that people, well, do not want to create. You see? So the thinking of a non-compliant lab, I like that big time. So how could a non-GDPR world look like? And I turn it around. How could a world with radical transparency look like? And what does it, or what takes it, maybe not to go the full Monty, but to go very close to that. And that I find a fascinating idea if I think about digital health data. Because what I very often hear is that my health data should be secure, shouldn't go to my insurer, right? Because if I tell my insurer that I get breast cancer, they will never ever insure me again. At least I'm aware of the first one who is turning that model upside down. Glass half empty becomes half full. Because if I know what my genetic predisposition tells me, I know the chance that I will get a certain cancer. The 6 months that I get sick, they make sure that they insure me not being able to work, not being able to take care for my children. After 6 months, they help me. I bring all the rest of my insurances to them. And all of a sudden, it's because they know I have a predisposition that they're willing to insure me, that they have helped me. And that model I find a fascinating one. If we would be able to convince people that based on sharing, you will be helped and will not be punished, then I think that is a way to move the world forward. And that's part of our delighting as well. Sometimes to remove the hurdles, to open up people's perspective, and then say, well, that's how far we can go.
There's plenty of evidence showing that remote patient monitoring is able to radically change the future of healthcare. I don't believe that RPM combined with virtual care can fully replace real care, but I do think it plays a role in supplementing it. What's your opinion in this regard, and what are the latest developments that digital healthcare offers in this area?
Yeah, it's absolutely, like I mentioned earlier, I have no clue what happens in the real world of my patients. If I now can send my patient with asthma or with cardiovascular disease home, and basically I have a device which monitors every single vital parameter 24/7, well, that obviously makes me a better doctor, right? And I'm going to give you an example of what remote monitoring can become, based on what happens in the US with Best Buy. Best Buy is a company which sells consumer electronics. I mean, scales, coffee machines, vacuum cleaners, smartphones, digital stuff. And they invested, before Corona, big time in explaining to elderly people, 70 years old, people which very often came in the shop, never bought something, too complex, too expensive, why should I use these? They spend the time in explaining very quietly, very thoroughly how digital could help them. And very slowly people started to buy things, came home, didn't work out, called Best Buy, and they used the time to slowly explain how things could be used. And then came to Corona. And Corona all of a sudden made that my kids couldn't visit me. And so elderly people in the US started to call Best Buy Mr. Best Buy. With all your technology, can't you make sure that you can watch me to see whether I can live safely at home? Currently, Best Buy has a data science team, 60 people, which watch 300,000 elderly people living safely at home in the comfort of their home without help. Fascinating, right? And a few months ago, Best Buy acquired a company which makes a patch which allows me to stick the patch like a freestyle thing on my skin and to measure 7 vital parameters in a remote fashion. 7 vitals, lung, cardiovascular capacity, oxygen levels. And so all of a sudden, a consumer electronics company has a remote monitoring technology which it can apply in 300,000 elderly people at home. Currently, every pharma company is knocking the door of Best Buy asking, Mr. Best Buy, can we collaborate to run clinical trials in the comfort of people's home? I think that is a fantastic summary to your question. Remote monitoring reduces the friction of going to the hospital. It removes the friction of having a single data point. It allows me to enter into my patient's life and help him in time and to basically discharge him or basically help him in a way I couldn't do before. And so while a lot of these things are still sticking to me, and the majority of these things are wearables, we start to see a movement to non-wearables, to things which are not touching us but which are standalones. And for instance, I can now put small machines in my room which use echo or radio waves, Doppler, to basically measure in a non-invasive fashion my biological parameters, get them into my medical records, and provide me with the safety that my doctor is 24/7 with me. 1. We see imaging devices like CT, like echo, which become handheld, so that the patient can start to use these things really at home. We see almost every parameter which is currently being measured at the doctor's practice will be able to be measured by the patient with certified medical grade device simply sticking to your smartphone. And that basically is happening right now, and so will really change the interaction of the doctor with the patient profoundly and forever.
You've said that healthcare needs to move from reactive patient care to proactive, predictive, and personalized care. What categories of patients is this especially relevant for, and what should developers of RPM solutions focus on?
Yeah, so we start to see the first applications happening in diabetic care. So currently, people with diabetes, what happens, they get blind and the kidney fails. Super costly. Now, diabetes is basically, type 2 diabetes, is basically a lifestyle disease. And so we start to see the first evidence coming from a number of startups that if you can play with my lifestyle, the amount I move, sleep, my stress levels, what I eat, that we are able to revert chronic diabetes back to pre-diabetes. So we have the first evidence that using remote technology to be with me at home allows me to bypass drugs and to revert chronic disease back to normal. That's something we never ever have been dreaming of. The same is currently being tested in a number of cancers. So can we revert cancer? Not with drugs, but with lifestyle and with remote monitoring tools. That's one. So I think that the learnings from the diabetic world will be applied in basically every disease pretty soon. And that, for instance, using technology to look to cognition, to my facial expression, to the number of errors I make when I type, that these will be the parameters to help, independent from which doctor I need, to become a better doctor. And to see my doctor moving from being there at the last part of a disease and to cure, that the doctor will start to change its function and become a little bit of my coach, because he will be able to measure something in time and will motivate me to change something. That's one. Two, if I look to a number of digital therapeutics, they are no longer just able to help my disease to treat, but they also start to deal with a number of my stigmatic things. So let me give you an example. People with Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, sometimes they take steps, they walk, and at some point in time they seem to freeze. It's like their leg stops in time, their foot stops in time, and that's a pretty annoying view, and they feel like, whoa, everybody is watching me, not nice. What we now can do is we can put a very small sensor in the shoe, and that sensor measures my gait, measure how I move my foot back on the ground. And that sensor is linked to my Spotify account. And once the sensor feels that I'm going to freeze, my Spotify account turns on, music goes louder, gets me over this inhibition, gets me over the freeze, and I walk without discontinuity. I'm destigmatized, I haven't cured my patient, I have helped my patient, right? And that is what I hope my future doctor is able to do, is use digital technology to enter into the real world of my patients and start to reduce every friction after friction. The earlier, the better. Second example, maybe one last in Parkinson. You might have seen people with Parkinson have a very hard time to eat soup. Now we have spoons, which do have a very tiny motor in them, and they compensate my tremor. And basically, now I can eat without shaking. So people no longer look to me while I'm in the restaurant. I'm destigmatized and I'm happy to go out with you for lunch. So that's again examples of digital technology which lower the barrier to have a kind of more decent life. And we see these applied really from front door to real back end. Every single aspect of being a patient, I think we can digitize and use to reduce friction after friction and to make healthcare no longer curative, but predictive, and for that matter, in the future, preventive.
There's an active development of marketplaces designed for finding the required medical research anywhere in the world. For example, ZAGENO, Quartzy, and Prendio. I know that many existing marketplaces are not able to connect with each other and with any other data sources, making it difficult to access the data you need from a single platform. What other issues can you mention?
Yeah, one big one. It's simply the lack of knowledge in healthcare that platforms and marketplaces exist and could be applied in healthcare. One super example, super recent, the Mayo Clinic platform. Launched last year, it's a platform where all data from the patients in the hospital get de-anonymized, open, and startups and big corporates can go on the platform, use these data, and build new startups, new algorithms. Good thing, trust comes from the hospital. The data are trusted by the doctors in the hospital. They become part of the new startup, and you get a marketplace from scratch. That is the coolest example I've seen the last 12 months. And I think that every single other player should watch how the Mayo Clinic built their marketplace.
Digital twin technology is actively used in dentistry, drug development, creating digital analogs of operated organs, and oncology. How is this technology revolutionizing healthcare, and what conditions are required for the development of digital twins in the market?
Yeah, so the entire concept is that every physical object has so much data generated during making it that we can make a virtual copy of that, the digital twin, and that if we want to improve the physical object, we first practice on the virtual one before we make the real one. in 2023, we start to see this feasible for not just not real human beings, but we can, for instance, model the heart. We can make a super virtual model of the heart and can find out how a stent, how a valve fits in your heart and not in mine. So we can make things so personalized because we have all the data from one organ in a virtual fashion that we can practice not on the real human being, but on the virtual model. The heart is the furthest evolved, but we're going to start to see that in every single organ, in every single cellular model. And I think that in 6 years from now, 5-6 years from now, with the speed of technology, that we will be able to model a complete human being, and that we will no longer test drugs on people first, but that we will test them really on virtual models to start with. And that is one of the biggest changes we're going to see in healthcare, that we're going to move from testing on biology, testing on in silico. Amazing amount of data we need, which need to be accessible, and why the entire development of private online data stores are so important. Because if people are not willing to share, or if we cannot use privacy conserving federated learning to collect all these data and bring them together to have the big picture of who you are, then it stops. So technology is there. It's the openness from the data providers and the willingness to see that I can bring data together without losing. If that works out fine, we can get this up and running, I think, in a few years' time from now. So there is no technological hurdle any longer. It's almost a community and almost ethical hurdle, which I see. And what I think is interesting is that while playing with humans seems kind of far out, that we start to see that every process, for instance, we see in building a new hospital, we first build a virtual model. And so the entire stream of patients we can model on the virtual model without making the error of having a corridor which is not needed, or which is too small, or which is too big. So the concept comes out of the building industry, the construction industry, and that knowledge will be applied into health care per se. But as I see, we started to work on these models in 2017, which is 6-7 years ago. If I see what was feasible then, what is feasible now, we can convincingly show the practice, the power and the benefit of digital twins to any end user. And so the adoption will go really fast now.
Siemens Healthineers has created a digital twin model for the prevention and effective management of strokes, taking into account the patient's genomics, current and past health conditions, lab data, and wearable monitoring devices data, allowing a patient to receive proper care in time and the provider to effectively triage suspected stroke patients. What motivates businesses to implement such technologies?
Yeah, Siemens, for instance, makes they make scanners as well. So they see that imaging is one of the hallmarks of being able to build these kind of twins. So if they have a way to get a data point also visualized, and at the end decisions are made on the full picture of data collected, and they are the data collector, then I think the value they see is to become a data company, which is where a lot of companies see their future, to become a data company, and all the rest becomes a commodity. Because at the end, if I have all the data who define me, I can change these data to define who I will look next and who I will become afterwards.
Who are the key players in this segment? What helped those companies to take the leading positions, in your opinion?
So there's a number of companies like MDClone or Unlearn, which are providing the technology to make synthetic humans. They digitize clinical data and prevent that I do trials on placebos. That's the first set of companies, MDClone, Unlearn. You have companies like Gemini, which make digital humans in silico to test in model systems how biology could work. We have a number of big pharma companies which are adopting the model of digital twins. We have the Siemenses or these planets, but we also have companies like Nokia. Nokia has a project to make a digital twin of the immune system. Microsoft has a project to make a digital twin of multiple sclerosis patients. So I start to see the really big tech companies, Nvidia, Microsoft, all entering healthcare either via some omics analysis or via a digital twin project. Really remarkable. And that's obvious because digital twins will require such huge amount of data, basically will benefit from things like 5G and in the future 6G. Obviously, if they have to run real time, they will benefit from quantum computing. And if you now see that quantum computing costs a bit, and only companies like Microsoft or IBM have the ability to invest in these, it's obvious that they become front runners. And that is maybe what I forgot to mention. In an ideal world, what a digital twin does, it's a one-on-one copy of the real one. So I should be able to translate all the measurements which I do on me with wearables, with insidables, with dermals, on the virtual model. Yeah, that by itself requires quite some transmission of data. That itself is not feasible yet because of the fact that we're only in 4G. That requires that we move up to next levels. And so there is technology maybe not lagging behind, but just in time to accommodate the increasing computer power, the increase in data available to accommodate that all these things have to come together to build real, workable, applicable digital twins. And that's why that projection of 2030, in my opinion, is an absolute realistic one.
What technologies in bioinformatics and genomics do you consider the most effective and to be capable of revolutionizing healthcare today?
I have a genomics background. I mean, I'm a molecular oncologist. I ran a biomarker company for 6 years where we didn't do genomics, we did proteomics. So my genome makes my transcriptome, makes my proteome, makes my metabolome. We have roughly 6 layers of omics, partly, and then we have the epigenome where my lifestyle basically attaches to my biology. And so I think the biggest hurdle for adoption is fear. The fear that citizens are not able to deal with the insight they get out of their genome. That's one. From a technological perspective, I think we are fast enough, we are cheap enough to bring genomics to the market. So it's an almost ethical political thing. On the other hand, genomics roughly defines 15 to 20% from who I am. 80% comes from environment, lifestyle, and goes to my genome via epigenomics, via transcriptomics and proteomics. And I used to run a protein biomarker company, which if I would start again, would still make use of the same technology. So there is a lagging of technology to look to the different layers of biology, besides the genome, in a comprehensive, understandable way to get enough insight out of that. And that is one of the biggest challenges. How do I find out how the 1,000 bacteria, the microbiome, living in my guts, influences how I eat, how my eating influences my health, how many permutations are there, how do I deal with the complexity of that? These are super exciting things for the next generation of students and biomedical people to solve. And that's where I expect the biggest breakthroughs. Our ability to use foundation models and large language models like in ChatGPT to apply them in biology to understand how we really are, understanding and bringing all the layers of omics together.
How can Metaverse transform healthcare?
2 answers. The first one, a number of things, I think I mentioned that earlier, are very hard to explain man to man. But I've seen and I feel that, for instance, someone with mental issues, I can take him or her into a virtual space which we design to her likeness. Someone likes to be in a museum. I can make a museum virtually. I can go with my patient in that museum and I can start walking around. And at the walls, I put paintings, pieces of art, even with an NFT. And so at some point in time, I'm standing in front of a painting of all letters coming down out of the sky. And in the middle of the painting is an umbrella. And under the umbrella, there is a white space. And my patient, my avatar patient, real patient, but avatar, tells me, wow, Koen, if I would be able to stand under the umbrella, I feel safe, I get resilience. That piece of art I download on her smartphone as an NFT, And from now on, every morning, she watches her smartphone and gets the rest, the piece from watching, to a piece of art she discovered in the metaverse. Example 1. So what we did in our team, we built a metaverse, Healthskouts metaverse environment, where we can emulate whatever you think of. So we can build your lab from your company. We can build the microscope, which watches to a microscope a glass and sees into the tissue of a patient with a tumor. I can take you to a 3D version of human body, show you the molecule, the drug which is going to treat you, and use something like DeepMind, part of Google, which allows to turn a protein sequence into a 3D model sequence. And instead of textbook knowledge, I give you a VR glass, walk you through a body, walk you through the drug, explain how that medication will work, and convince you as a doctor to prescribe that medication to your patients. That is something a Zoom call, a Teams call will never be able to do. That is something we now can do in 3 dimensions, bringing experts together, not bound to geography, which come together and discuss in almost real world how the world should proceed. And we feel that there is an absolute openness, even while the word metaverse might be toxic, to endorse the fact that in an immersive world, you have new ways to interact, to explain, to educate, and to make people aware on what is new. And that's why I think the metaverse will stay as a virtual tool to expand the way we educate and we bring awareness to our next generation.
The digital revolution has brought about a number of changes in our day-to-day lives. Many of these changes have had a positive impact on well-being, while some others have had more of a negative impact. Can you please provide a few examples of effective technologies that are able to stimulate behavioral change for a healthier lifestyle and disease prevention?
One of the coolest ones is Netflix. You can characterize the favorite, no, you can select the favorite character from your favorite Netflix series as a coach on your smartphone. And only if you exercise enough, you can watch the next episode of your favorite series already. That's a pretty cool stimulus. That's a pretty cool reward. I have seen Squid Game 2 already. You haven't. Pretty cool experience which kept me healthy. That kind of idea. So I bring you experiences. Second example, I bring people together and I make a game in which I motivate to live healthy. Singapore made a deal with Apple and provides every citizen of Singapore the chance to get an Apple Watch and to get 2 real Singaporean dollars every day for every day they live healthy. People find that fantastic because they get a physical reward, right? And for the state, it's way cheaper to pay these things than to wait till I get sick. And that's where the model is indeed changing. For every $99, yen, euro we spend to the last 2 years of our life, we only spend 2 years to prevention. So if you take 10% of the 99, you expand the one with almost 1,000%. And Singapore is one of the first countries endorsing digital technology to exactly that. And to make the full circle to where you started, what they also offer is a platform, a marketplace if you like. And that marketplace is called OncoShot. And basically every citizen in Singapore with cancer gets access to that marketplace, gets his genome on that marketplace, so that every pharma company on the planet can get me and offer me a clinical trial based on my genetic profile. So as a citizen in Singapore, I have access to the world of clinical trials by one digital marketplace. I find that fascinating.
For many of us, a visit to a doctor causes worries, concerns, and sometimes even anxiety. You say the best way for healthcare systems to change this is by using innovation to cause excitement. This is what your book, Your Guide to Delight, is about, which is kind of a roadmap on the way to a healthy lifestyle using the new concept of delightful thinking, as well as the introduction of our personal digital twin. Has your book helped anyone?
Let me give you a few examples. In Harlem, in New York, is a hospital and they have installed a man's cave with all the paraphernalia of my favorite sports teams. that motivates men to get their colon and their prostate screened. That's delightful. I look forward to see that hospital, right? I go to the hospital, I can bring my dog because there is a kennel. Why is that important? The biggest stress going to the hospital for someone living alone is who will take care for the dog, right? So bringing the dog to the hospital reduces the stress, treats me faster, and gets me out of the hospital faster. Second example. Third example. On the beach in Peru, there is a Wi-Fi wall, and only in the shadow I get Wi-Fi. I find that a fascinating model. It's digital, mobile, it's nicely designed, and it prevents me from getting skin cancer. That is delight. It allows me to provide me a service I didn't expect. In a hospital here in Belgium, we help people with diabetes, and we send them home, but only after they get cooking class. They learn to cook healthy, and they get a tool. Once they start to cook healthy and they have a menu made, they can distribute that menu via a, again, kind of marketplace as the menu to big corporates in the neighborhood. So they end up in vending machines of a big retailer. So all of a sudden, I was a patient yesterday. Tomorrow, I sell my own plates after learning to live healthy in a hospital. That is, in my opinion, what delight is about. It provides me experiences close to magic but real, where digital is an enabler, and it helps me to remain healthy. And looking to the world in that way is a fascinating one, because at the end, what we all want to do is die young, but as late as possible, right? And so if delight helps me as a provider to provide that kind of dream, then so far I haven't had anyone who is against that kind of dream. And so instead of selling technology, I sell the idea of asking a hospital, a tech company, a pharma company, what would it be if you would sell delight? And the technology we find to do that.
What books about digital healthcare would you recommend? Who of the opinion leaders is worth subscribing to on LinkedIn or YouTube to keep abreast of this area of technological advancement?
Yeah, I think you've interviewed Daniel already, Daniel Kraft. So he is one of the top guys. I think Eric Topol must be in the top 3, absolutely required. Jane Sarason Khan is a health economist, absolute requirement to follow. But besides these 3 health people, I would also recommend to look to people outside of healthcare, because sometimes it's inspiring to learn how, for instance, artists, where creativity comes from, and to ask, well, why don't we do that in our domain? So I would rather even advise to read and to look to things not in our domain, to be inspired and ask ourselves, well, what can we do to apply that here? And then looking to the things like what Pixar is doing, looking to the guy who was running this big restaurant in New York. I'm blanking on the name now. I think it's 9... Recently wrote a book about how they brought hospitality care from a restaurant to the general public. These are the learnings which I think we all should read, whether we are digital people or omic people, to bring hospitality and super delight into the practice of what digital should do. So I'm happy to provide a number of names afterwards, but Kraft, Sarason, Khan, Topol in healthcare, and then a number of really outliers not in healthcare to be inspired on what it could look like to live tomorrow.
Koen, thank you so much for taking the time to give us this interview. And thanks for sharing the insights, which I'm quite sure many people would find both useful and informative.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to work with you together in the future.